You did it. You clicked on me. I'm Chris. Welcome to the channel. I've awakened from my slumber inside your screen, and oh my goodness, I love it. Let's get right into it. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. Shh, 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 shh. You can't leave. My mind powers will not let you. Content is too descriptive these days, at least most of the content that you're likely to see. But I don't mean that it isn't abstract enough. I mean that a lot of media that we consume seems to have a similar approach when it touches on social issues. Touch, touch. Touchy, touch. Touch, touch, touch. Namely, to describe the problem. And that's it. Very few works that you're likely to find on mainstream channels provide any kind of prescription for what an individual or society can do when faced with an important issue. And I think that's for a lot of reasons. We'll get into what those reasons are, but first I want to be clear. One, I'm going to be using the terms art and content kind of interchangeably in this video, because in my opinion, they're usually the same thing. They might always be the same thing. When I use those terms, it applies to TV and film as much as it does YouTube and Vine. Is Vine still a thing? Are we still doing? Back in my day, we didn't call it TikTok, we called it Vine. We walked to school on instant messenger. There were no cell phones, it was just a complex system of small, very helpful gremlins who would shout in your face. Number two, I don't hold it against any content or content creator for being descriptive. Building an accurate depiction or metaphor or allegory for a systemic problem that we're currently facing, that's what I call descriptive art. And so many things fall under this category. And so many of them are not just great, but important. Defining a problem is the first step towards fixing it. Calling out an issue and depicting it with accuracy and nuance, this is undeniably a good thing. It's good. I love descriptive art. Yum, 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 give me more. But when the large preponderance of easily available art is stuck in the analysis/identification phase of advocacy, that's when I start to get a little suspicious. Just as an example, dystopian prestige TV dramas are a thing. Some of them are good, some of them are not. But the way I see it, basically all of them perform the same basic function as an art piece. They depict a cold, hard, brutal future wherein the system will never structurally change. They may suggest that reform is possible, or they may not. But almost nothing ever changes about the root of the issues that are presented in them. Because regardless of how any of these artworks choose to end their story, it's clear that they're less interested in solutions and more interested in problems. Mind you, this issue is not just limited to dystopian TV. It's everywhere. Again, taken individually, these works aren't necessarily doing anything wrong. You're allowed to make art like that. It's good. It's good. But when audiences are only ever exposed to problems and given no imagination for viable solutions, then we're all left shrugging at what to do about anything at all. What's more, we're less able to envision a different trajectory for society. When you don't know what to do and you can't imagine any alternative as viable, then the vibe kind of becomes apocalyptic. A conspicuous lack of prescriptive content winds up radiating doom, which, as a knock-on effect, also incentivizes a really specific sort of apathy. It's not just, I don't care, so why bother? And it's not even, I'm too tired, so why bother? It's, nothing has worked so far, there's nothing else left to try, we're locked in, we're all doomed, so why bother? I think our media ecosystem is out of balance, and I think it contributes to the growing prevalence of not just apathy, but doomerism, especially in the face of late-stage capitalism and the climate crisis, but really all problems. And what if I told you that this imbalance was to an extent willingly manufactured for this exact purpose? To keep both content creators and audiences at a disadvantage when trying to make a positive impact on society. What if I told you that this started in the year 1950? And what if I told you that in 1966, the New York Times revealed that the American government was behind it? But wait, you say. My doomerism isn't the result of a CIA-funded campaign. I know we're all doomed. I've done research. Yeah, well, buddy, so have I. And I'm gonna hit you with some shit. So you better pay attention, baby. Gotta keep that retention rate up, 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 up. Let me show you something.
When do you think the world will end?
Like, I think it's ending now, and there's not going to be like fireworks and, you know, people falling into the earth center. I think it's going to be long and painful death.
This sentiment is one I definitely used to agree with, but now I'm not so sure. To be clear, I am not trying to diminish the severity of humanity's apparent trajectory. We are definitely in some deep shit, and this is definitely not about denying the climate crisis or all the other crises that we face. This is about how we're pressured into feeling about them, and how content creators like myself are unwittingly duped into contributing to that feeling. Alice Capel recently released an amazing video on this exact subject that you absolutely need to watch, and she sums it up really nicely. Roll tape!
In the apocalyptic tradition, the present is such that there is no longer any escape. Refusal, rebellion, or any other action is futile. there is nothing to be done except watch as the end approaches and prepare ourselves for the encounter. In the context of the climate crisis, such tradition finds concrete meaning. Humans have been too greedy and they will pay for it. They will suffer until they face collective death. To be fair, it's kind of the message hidden behind a lot of today's dystopic movies.
Fucking yes, exactly. Also, can I cite myself? I think I'm going to cite myself. Capitalism uses our desire for systemic change as a market opportunity, thereby opiating the masses through the very consumption of anti-capitalist content that's more concerned with building a precise model of the world we live in, rather than building a precise model of how to change that world for the better. God, I freaking nailed it. When I watch a show like Squid Game, I feel validated for my views on economics and power. But I also feel pacified, like the show has performed my activism for me. It's opiating, not energizing. I don't feel inspired to action after I finish the series because there's literally no call to action. I just have a catharsis and go about my day. With regards to social problems, it's purely descriptive, not prescriptive. And that's why in response to that art, we're more likely to create this kind of stuff than this kind of stuff. No shade to Squid Game, except for the ending. Not a fan of the ending. But it's not about the individual work of art, it's about a pattern in mainstream media. And when we're talking about art that kind of has this opiating effect, we are not limited to dystopias. For I think some of the same reasons, there's been growing backlash against movies that really lean into black trauma. They've been called black pain movies or black trauma movies. And by the way, this moniker does not apply to all art about black struggle, not by a long shot.
There's a movie coming out, in fact. I don't know if y'all have seen it yet. The Emmett Till movie. And I hate it. That movie is not being created for anybody except for white liberals. And it's for white liberals to see it and then discard it. They're not going to see it and then fight to have it taught in, U.S. history. They're not going to see it and try to address structural racism within this country, income inequality. Like, they're not going to see it and do anything productive. They're going to see it. They're going to be like, oh, wow, that was a lot. And then they're going to move on. It's basically, this is us. When it's done with this, I don't want to say toothless, but there's a certain way to do it where you all but guarantee nothing will actually be learned.
Hey, so this is editing, Chris. Coming at you off the cuff, unscripted, raw. Geez, there's the person that you see on your screen, and then there's a person that I keep locked in the basement editing his crazy thoughts. So I wanted to really flesh this part out because I want to be as clear and thematically consistent as possible. This is just one example of how art will present an issue and then opiate us. Dystopian art will do that to those of us who are anti-capitalist. Black trauma movies will do that, especially for us white folks who are oriented as anti-racist. Doesn't mean we're not problematic. And it will happen in anti-sexist and feminist art. So I'm gonna show you another Alice Capel clip from like her newer video because she's just on fire recently.
But we have to remember that catharsis, since the Greek tragedies, serves to purge the audience from sins, fears, etc. In the context of female rage, cathartic movies serve to create a space for that anger to exist. But ultimately, the goal is for you to leave that anger behind and find peace, to go back to life and live hand in hand with patriarchy again.
The catharsis that we get from content like this makes us feel better about it, but it does still contribute to this growing sense of doom. Because even if we feel better in the moment, the problem doesn't go away. And we know that because we see the news, and we keep seeing art about the same old problems. And because everything is so problem-oriented and not solutions-oriented, we start to get the sense that there's nothing we can do, that it's all been tried. Especially if the art or content itself is nihilistic. So now I'm gonna head back to the main video and talk about the phenomenon of why we have this preponderance of descriptive art that focuses on giving us catharsis and focuses on the problems and never focuses on the solutions. What's up with that? Why is that everywhere? Why are we ourselves doing it? It's a pattern of easily accessible art that has way less to do with its creators and way more to do with the people who control what kind of art we get to see or what kind of art we don't. Because when you start to notice a pattern in art, it's not always enough to just chalk it up to the zeitgeist. Like, that's just where we are right now, creatively speaking. No, when you notice a pattern in content and art, you need to start to question the proverbial galleries in which they hang, how they're being curated, and by whom. Let's talk about doom grifting. People in power know what's good for them. Executives are fine greenlighting content that simultaneously says the system is bad and you can never change it. Because even if it implicates them as part of the problem, it doesn't threaten them. You don't have to make content to control the conversation and maintain the status quo. You just have to control the media highway, the infrastructure by which content is distributed. That way, anything truly radical you can suppress. Psst. Hey, YouTubers, Does this sound familiar? Remind you of how our platform keeps the terms of service deliberately vague so it can justify any suppressive action? How about you, TikTokers? I know you guys know what I'm talking about. You might be thinking, yeah, dude, you're just talking about censorship, duh. But stick with me, I'm going somewhere with this. Obviously, this grift isn't just about pacifying audiences, this is about clipping the wings of content creators. But when radical content is suppressed, artists struggle to create it. Not just because it'll be buried in the algorithm or demonetized or deleted, but because we struggle to dream it up in the first place. Moving beyond critique to the next step in our own imaginations is made far more difficult because we're also living in this media ecosystem. Yeah, there's not a ton of visible reference material for how to do this. This is called capitalist realism, and it is bad. We can't see a way out. It's that famous quote, say it with me now. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. You know, there's a comfort in doom. As I said, it leads to apathy, and apathy frees you from responsibility. Doomers will often call out hope or optimism for the future as a cope. And if we're talking about just running on good vibes and waiting for technocrats to save us, then yeah, they're right. But doomerism is also a cope. You get to just say, fuck it, let's ride the apocalypse out. Throw your hands up, let's just watch the world burn. Helplessness is seductive because it means we don't have to do shit. I think some balance in our content environment can help us break through that, through the cope. We need more art that shows us a way forward, not just where we are right now or where we're headed if we don't change anything. But making that kind of content is also really difficult because we've been tricked into thinking that it would be bad art if we did. And if you're not a content creator, you've probably been tricked into thinking that it's bad art when you see it, at least in certain mediums. Definition time. When I say prescriptive art, what I mean is any kind of content that inspires you to do something concrete. It either tells you what to do directly or shows you an alternative way to exist. It engenders motivation. Now, I'm not suggesting that content needs to be heavy-handed or preachy or lacking in subtlety. Not necessarily. There are tons of ways to be prescriptive without hitting people over the head. But let me just ask, what's so wrong with being heavy-handed? What's wrong with leaving little to interpretation? What's wrong with exposition? Sometimes you need a hammer, not a feather. But there's this broad sense in many artistic communities that doing these things somehow cheapens your art. Cards on the table, part of me feels this way too. I mean, there's a part of me that's really worried this video is going to come off as condescending or paternalistic or like I think I know all the answers. But the reality is I'm in awe of artists and content creators. That's why I'm here, in your screen. Especially in this lefty essayist corner of the internet, I feel like I'm in good company. This space, way more often than not, makes me proud of people. But just by dint of the fact that I'm making bold, declarative statements about how we should be making content, especially while still rocking a micro channel, part of me is just terrified this whole thing is bad and, embarrassing. And that's for a lot of different reasons. But one of those reasons has to do with the US government, so let's talk about that one. You might be familiar with the concept of show, don't tell. It's basically the first thing you learn in any kind of writing course, no matter what kind of media you're writing for. From literature to screenplays and everything in between. And there's a reason for that. Let's get into some history. In 1950, the CIA secretly founded the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CCF, which was an advocacy group that was created for the purpose of suppressing and discrediting leftist ideas, specifically within the arts. The Cold War was fucking wild. The CCF sponsored dozens of highly prestigious, highly famous literary publications, held international conferences, funded art exhibits, awarded artists with special prizes, and owned news publications the world over. It had offices in 35 different countries at its height. I mean, it had money everywhere, including universities and creative writing programs. This is the origin of Show Don't Tell. A New York Times book review of Workshops of Empire by Eric Bennett sums all of this up really, really well. Good literature, students learned, contains sensations, not doctrines, experiences, not dogmas, memories, not philosophies. The goal was to discourage the abstract theorizing and systematic social critiques to which the radical literature of the 1930s had been prone, in favor of a focus on the personal, the concrete, and the individual. While workshop administrators wanted to spread American values, they didn't want to be caught imposing a particular ideology on their students, for fear of appearing to use the same tactics as the communists. Thus, they presented their aesthetic principles as a non-political, universally valid means of cultivating writerly craft. The continued status of Show Don't Tell as a self-evident truth, dutifully dispensed to anyone who ventures into a creative writing class, is one proof of their success. Fucking yikes! It was actually the New York Times again, in 1966, that blew the lid off the CIA's involvement in the Congress for Cultural Freedom, exposing it for basically being a PSYOPs program. And they also revealed how the recipients of those funds, the organizations and the individuals, knew exactly where their money was coming from and why. Hell, some of the employees of these CCF affiliates were CIA agents themselves. We know this because they were some of the initial whistleblowers. And that caused a splash in 1966, but it took 10 more years before the organization disbanded. Even still, many of the art publications and programs that prospered from CIA backing continue to exist and be influential to this day. In the year of our Lord, 2023. So we've all been conditioned as artists and critics that declarative, prescriptive, overtly political art is sloppy and in poor taste and embarrassing. To be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with art or artists that adhere to the method of show don't tell. It's a wonderful approach, full of possibilities. But when it's accepted as a universal metric for quality instead of a stylistic choice, when it's taught as an immutable fact and facet of good art, we cut ourselves off from artistic content that tells us what to do about our problems. Seems like there might be some value in content like that, but we either suppress it or dismiss it as poor writing. And as artists, we avoid doing it like the plague. And that was kind of the plan all along. Ideological critique is all well and good, but don't be too preachy. And definitely don't presume to answer the questions that your content raises in the first place. That's a no-no. And you can't do a no-no. I got a secret, guys. I'm kind of a no-no boy. Just full-on slow pour it on my lap. Cool. Shit. Again, we can draw a direct line from this doctrine to our current artistic climate, wherein a lack of artistically presented solutions in mainstream media and content in general contribute to leaving us feeling hopeless and helpless. I know it sounds corny, but art can absolutely change the world. That's why powerful institutions are so interested in regulating and suppressing it. They're threatened by it. Behind every clenched fist, behind every brick thrown, is an idea. Oh, and speaking of suppressing things, surprise, it's a different day for me only, not for you, not necessarily. I have a different shirt on. This is how you can tell. These are the details. These are the details I know you can catch. This is why we're here. I could trust you to catch those little itsy bitsy. Anyway, continuing on. Okay, so there's more deterring us from creating prescriptive content than what I've just detailed. There are cases where directly advocating for certain solutions to social and political issues may be against a platform's term of service, or maybe even outright illegal. For example, fellow anarchist Andrewism's recent video, How We Can Change the World, engages with possible solutions that through a fictitious lens.
For those of us who haven't completely given up on the fate of the world, we're looking for ways to change our trajectory. We want to know what we can do to help. Our situation, of course, calls for real change. It calls for more than just resistance. It calls for revolution, social revolution. What anarchists propose for a complete transformation of our society, economy, culture, philosophy, technology, relationships, and politics. Of course, that would be illegal. So while our situation may call for it, I cannot. As we all know, legality is what determines morality. However, if we're operating in the world of fiction, we can explore the practical components of social revolution. If our characters are facing apocalyptic collapse in their lifetimes and they're seeking real change, the answer is social revolution.
You know, just a bit of fiction. Similarly, in Philosophy Tube's video on violence, Abigail Thorne leads us to question why we label certain actions as violent and other actions as necessary force. She implores the climate movement to rethink their tactics while simultaneously rethinking how we define violence socially, to the benefit of the powerful. In my opinion, this is a really good example of content that adheres to show, don't tell, while also being prescriptive. I mean, theoretically prescriptive. Allegedly prescriptive. I mean, she's not saying that we should destroy fossil fuel infrastructure. Why that would be illegal. I mean, of course, advocating for such things becomes a bit easier and safer in art forms divorced from clear authorship, like memes. And authorship is crucial here too, because depending on who you are, your advocative content can come at a cost. I'm not just talking about demonetization and deplatforming. People who belong to highly marginalized groups have been more severely punished historically for, well, everything. But also, especially their ideas about where to take society. And they've been far more severely punished for making art in the first place, regardless of the content. Just look into the history of book burning. It's a kind of a recent history.
I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see it.
So choose your side. Why don't you just use a chipper? Well, they didn't use a chipper in the Bible. They burned it. There's something symbolic about burning it.
Scratch that. If you need proof, just look into like all of history. Okay, so this is a good point to send out a trigger warning for some heavy racism. You may have heard about the 1985 MOVE bombing when Philadelphia police dropped 2 literal bombs, which is a thing the police have, apparently, from a helicopter onto a home in a black neighborhood. They killed 11 people, 5 of whom were children, and they left 250 people homeless. Then, the actual bones of those children were stolen and used for research for 40 years in the Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and then later at Princeton. You may have heard about that. Fewer people may have heard about why Philadelphia police chose that home specifically. This was a home to a community of black anarchists who were outspoken against capitalism and the climate crisis. You know, there are plenty of punk rock, predominantly white, self-identified anarchists staging protests, putting on loud shows, selling zines, sharing houses, and using profanity. Just look in any major city. They never get bombed, though. They never get bombed after the police shoot over 10,000 rounds at their place of residence. White leftist voices have historically been silenced, but black and other marginalized leftists have been historically assassinated. That's what the MOVE bombing was. It wasn't just an act of terrorism. It was an assassination. It's no wonder that some of the more radical black art that's visible to quote-unquote mainstream audiences take a more surreal and abstract approach when attempting to point audiences toward possible steps forward.
Equisapiens, let's be out.
In my opinion, I think that content creators are obligated by their artistic integrity to think about the next step beyond analysis when advocating for justice. But for more privileged content creators like myself, I think we're obligated by more than just artistic integrity. I think we're obligated by how we're situated in society. We have got more plot armor in real life. We have a duty to be on the front lines. Okay, so it's all well and good for me to like say, oh, just make prescriptive art, but what does it even look like? Where are the points of reference? Are there some good examples in popular art? Turns out there are, so I want to briefly touch on good examples of popular art that I would consider prescriptive while still operating within the current pedagogy and paradigm of show don't tell. I think this works achieve this by giving us hope for, and especially an illustration of, alternative ways to live and exist, both systemically and what that could look like in our day-to-day. Because remember, the mainstream artistic mode doesn't just rob us of solutions and calls to action, but of visions of alternatives. It robs us of our imagination for the future, hence the doom. And remember, that's what we're fighting here, the sense of doom. Not knowing what to do, not being able to see how things could get better, that makes you feel like you're completely out of control. And if you're completely out of control, you're doomed. So in the novel The Dispossessed, Ursula Le Guin, I think that's how you say her name. How do you say her name? Le Guin? No way. In the novel The Dispossessed, Ursula Le Guin, I think she pronounces it Le Guin, writes about an alien race that has built an egalitarian, anarchist society. She goes into great detail about how those people relate to each other and how their society functions. The first 2 Star Trek series sort of do this as well.
A lot has changed in the past 300 years. People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy. This is the 24th century. Material needs no longer exist.
Then what's the challenge?
The challenge, Mr. Offenhouse, is to improve yourself, to enrich yourself. Enjoy it.
It didn't always come to radical conclusions, and it was often very problematic, but that mode of investigation still breaks through the current landscape of myopically focusing on how humanity is for sure doomed. Are you still watching? Next episode in 3, 2, 1.
We're going to form a union.
In film, there's Blade Runner 2049, which is bleak, but it sends a clear message that it's more fulfilling to reject the comforts of capitalist modernity, and to reject the myth that we need to be some sort of protagonist or chosen one in order to make a positive, substantial impact on the world. Also in film is Sorry to Bother You, which goes into great detail about how race intersects with class, but on the prescriptive side of things provides a clear vision for how we can start and sustain unionization efforts. And in video games, there's Disco Elysium. Disco Elysium is my favorite game of all time. I think it's one of the best works of art, just period, full stop. It's fucking brilliant. While seemingly nihilistic, it offers an unflinching examination of ideology itself. And if you play it a certain way, it depicts an incredible hopefulness by affirming that what seems hopeless and impossible, political or otherwise, isn't. If you want me to do a video on it, just let me know in the comments because I would do it in a heartbeat. There are no rules on this channel. I could do whatever I want. This is all about just getting my brainwaves out there so you can just like, I don't know, catch them with your brain and eat them. It's like blowing a kiss, but with fucking delta waves. Just play Disco Elysium, okay? But there's one last thing to talk about, and it's YouTube. YouTube is good at prescriptive art. We're doing it, guys. We're saving the world. Look, there's always room for improvement. But compared to other platforms, I think we're leading the charge. Possibly because the majority of content creators probably don't think of what they do as art, and therefore feel less pressure to adhere to show, don't tell. Video essays have their roots in the vlog, so we're just as connected to oral storytelling traditions as we are to visual ones. Channels interested in providing very concrete steps forward for their audiences do often still struggle to break out of small channel purgatory. But there is a deeply encouraging wealth of content creators who do more than build a precise model of the world that we live in. Anrel, Andrewism, Foreign Man, Dat Dang Dad, Ro Ramden, Colormind, Climate Town Turb, Mia Cole and CJ the X, you know from my last video, because that's where you know them from, right? That's who introduced you to them. Honestly, the list goes on and on. Fuck, like all of BreadTube has at some point done content like I'm describing. In the past few weeks, I've been told to engage in mutual aid, to reach out to others if I'm spiraling, been given visions of a future world without hierarchy and told to delete my TikTok. We provide sources down here. Squid Game can't do that shit. Hands May Tale can't do that shit. So I'll be highlighting some excellent, fairly recent videos in the description, so please check them out. It will not be by any means an exhaustive list. But finally, I want to give you my call to action. It's probably clear by now what that is, but as an artist, I've never traded in subtlety. If you're a content creator, keep creating. Whether it's descriptive or prescriptive or on YouTube or somewhere else, it makes a difference. It changes lives. It really does. And if you feel that your artistry can be stretched to operate on the prescriptive side of things every once in a while, fucking do it. Work that muscle. But no matter who you are, think about how any given piece of content makes you feel afterwards. Even and especially if you agree with it. Does it make you feel sated or energized? Does it make you feel hopeless? If so, why? Is it the content that's making you feel that way, or the pattern of content that you're being delivered, or both? And is there some action that you could take, however small, that would benefit others according to your principles, your morals, your politics? If there is, just ask yourself without judgment why you haven't done it yet. Is it because it's too difficult, or is it because you feel like it really would make much of a difference anyway? And if it's the latter, think back on this video. Do you really feel that way, or have you been led to feel that way? I personally believe that an equitable world where everyone's needs are met can't be achieved without joy. Because a world in which we're all free and equal is a world in which we're happy. I think building that world will invariably give you that sensation. If you want to help do that, you know you're on the right track when the process makes you feel fulfilled. Follow that bliss, my friends. If you're interested, you can check out my other videos on YouTube content and capitalist realism like here. But most importantly, I live inside your screen. Please don't send me back to the void. Like and subscribe, ring the fucking bell. I want to live.